Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
What does Iraq Saddam Hussein want? What's he willing to do to get it? And what's it going to cost us, those of us here in the United States, in the Midwest, and Indiana? Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll talk about the aggression of Iraq, the problem of Kuwait, the fears of the Saudis, and the role of the United States. Our panelists are Craig Ladwig, Executive Director of the Indiana Policy Review Foundation, Uwe Kohler, Professor in the College of Architecture at Ball State and a former resident of Saudi Arabia, T.J. Yusuf, Marketing Consultant from Indianapolis, a former resident of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia who has traveled extensively throughout the Middle East, and John Rouse, producer of this program and a member of the political science faculty at Ball State University. I mentioned, John, what's it going to cost us? Obviously, the United States has some concerns in this major problem.
I think that's a very good question because I've thought of the English words principal and principal, P-R-I-N-C-I-P-A-L, or is this an issue of P-R-I-N-C-I-P-L-E? That's the question, I think, for Hoosiers and also for Indiana citizens and also for Americans. The issue is, are we in the Middle East because of our values of principal, which is money and oil, or are we in the Middle East for issues of principle, P-R-I-N-C-I-P-L-E? Democracy, are we in Saudi Arabia to encourage the Saudi Arabians to allow women to drive? I think not. I think for the most part, we're in the Middle East because of principal, P-A-L, money, oil.
Protecting our interests, protecting the interests of American companies.
And as we're in the Middle East, we have to keep in mind that the history of the Middle East is basically feudalistic still. They have not passed through an industrial revolution as has Western Europe and the United States. And so we have to keep in mind that the culture is very, very different. The history is very, very different. So keeping in mind that our values, are we standing up for our values, the values of principal and the values of principle?
Craig, do you have an answer?
No, I don't have an answer. I'll vote for PAL. I don't know first if it's an achievable objective to produce a United States of Arabia and Northern Africa, but if it is, the Arabs are going to do it, and we're not going to be able to do it. Our goal seems, very simple and straightforward, is to secure the lowest price of oil that the free market will bear. And if that's crass, that sort of thing isn't said very much in United States politics. We have a principle of solipsism, that we assume that everybody outside our borders behaves pretty much like they do in suburban Boston. And that's not going to be the case, and we're going to learn that real quickly here. As a corollary to the principal distinction, which is crucial, and I'm looking forward to hearing what some of the others say on that, there's a lot of opportunity here. There's an opportunity to, like I said, free up oil markets. There's an opportunity to, what King Henry IV says in Shakespeare, give giddy minds foreign quarrels. This is going to focus the defense debate wonderfully, which was 2 or 3 weeks ago, if you recall, was getting, silly in some instances. There's an opportunity to stabilize the Middle East. I'm not so sure that we're not going to have to play the same role Great Britain played in Europe during the nation-building era. Support whoever looks like they're going to lose.
T.J. Uwe, well, what do you think that the Kuwaitis or the Saudis expect from the United States? What do they want our role to be, do you think?
Well, frankly, I'm really challenged to respond to the first one first.
Okay.
I sincerely hope that we're in it for both, whatever the spelling is. I think what I really like is the fact that the United Nations was acting very decisively, very quickly, and that there indeed is not only U.S. interested represented, but if we would watch, say, Egyptian TV, we would also see that their soldiers are marching are on their way, are stationed already in Saudi Arabia. So I think what is really at stake are a number of things. Money and oil certainly is a very important one. The other one is that indeed aggression, invasion of a smaller country, simply swallowed up from one day to another, is something which is not accepted.
Yeah, and I think that is the PLE again. It's the focus upon democracy. This is all being clouded under national sovereignty. And the world cannot stand for another Poland to occur in the Middle East.
But the Arabs seem a little nervous about U.S. involvement, TJ. They're concerned that perhaps we're going to be a little bullish over there. They'd prefer, I think, obviously, to resolve their own problems if they could.
Well, they haven't had the opportunity to respond according to our standard in here. And as John just mentioned, I mean, the Americans, we are there for either or, you know, interest or whatever. But whose interest, really? It is what happens to the communists over there, that they have all of a sudden lost their teachers for the past 70 years, you know. I mean, for me, as, you know, living in Indianapolis and try to really understand what's going on, it's very difficult to understand as why we are there if we only lost 700,000 barrels a day. You know, I mean, why? You know, I mean, what about the communist bloc? What about the rest of the world? Why do we have to send 250,000 soldiers in there with all these things? Why? You know, I keep on asking why. Did the flow of oil stop from that part of the world? No, it didn't. So, for the Kuwaitis to react or solve their problem, they have had the problem for, God knows, 50 years in there. The Arabs will always fight among themselves, for whatever reason, for water, for camel, for... this is their democracy. Our democracy is different. So until we understand what's their democracy in their own mind, what it is, I mean, we can't really condone it and or maybe even approve of it because we don't understand it.
Do the Arab nations need us there?
I don't think so. They certainly don't see it that way. I saw Colonel Harry Summers, who's a military strategist, on TV the other night, and he, of course, he has a book on the Middle East, but he was talking about if at the War College, if they say the next Napoleon will be born in Northern Africa, because of the lines are so drawn so arbitrarily, as you agree. But here's a question that I think you beg. It may not be true that history repeats itself. It tries to repeat itself. And in the Middle East, I think they are in a period of nation building. Now, whether we're going to play like a Star Trek captain and say, let's see what happens, regardless of what happens to the price of oil or what else, is not really on the table. We're going to try to control events.
Such as?
Such as what's just happened.
Well, such as
weeks.
the premise that if Saddam Hussein controls 45% of the world's oil production, that has a tremendous implication, not just short-term in terms of our economy and our standard of living. That has long-term principal, P-A-L, focus. It also has long-term principal focus in terms of allowing small states to gobble up others. But it seems to me that it is incumbent for the American administration to explain to the American people why we're going to be over there, because very soon I'm afraid that Americans are going to start dying. And just to this date, there's only one person who's been killed, and he has 4 children. And what is that mother going to explain to those children in terms of why was Daddy over there? And so it seems incumbent that the American administration start getting underneath some of these issues.
Died in a car accident, I understand.
Yeah, a truck accident.
Well, that's TJ's question. Why are we over there then?
We are over there for
I think this is answered already, isn't it? We said it is really for, and I don't know, maybe we are there for various reasons. One is that we, as Americans, were unable to respond responsibly, I guess, to the oil threats, crises of the past. I'm talking about the 1973. I'm talking also about when the war between Iraq and Iran started, two major producers.
Yeah,
There
but
was a problem.
we paid less for oil in here when there was a war in there. And there was
Absolutely.
a threat of the whole oil fields being somehow exploded.
But
we still paid less. Why are we paying more and there is no stoppage of the oil?
We are still importing we are presently importing 50% of our oil needs at a
Not from the
tremendous
Middle
cost from various countries. Somebody is using it from there. We are very dependent on the oil price because we are using a lot. And as a matter of fact, our energy policy probably was in a state of amnesia for a long period of time. When we compare, say, the United States with Western Europe, they had a completely different attitude. They are more dependent on oil than the United States. But I wonder, that is one reason, our way of life, our inability to consume less than what we have.
Yeah,
That's one reason why we are over there. The other one, I think, is indeed that we would like to deal with a new period where world peace seems to be so close. And that dream seems to be really sort of rocked and shattered a little bit.
Yeah, Uwe, if I can pick up on Craig's point, it certainly will center our focus on several issues. Number one, we will begin to have more of an appreciation of the Arab world and the Middle East. Number two, it will have a focus in terms of what is going to be the appropriate role of defense. And given the premise that we tend to fight wars based upon how we fought the last war, we have a very different battlefield ahead of us. And thirdly, I go back to the point, I just wish that Jimmy Carter, 11 years ago, could have been more articulate with his Malaise speech when he talked about this issue was the moral equivalent of war. Now, indeed, some 11 years later, we are on the threshold of having real war, not just the moral equivalent thereof.
Yeah, let's don't talk about it around it. This is a Clausewitzian war. This is diplomacy by other means.
Yep.
Whatever you want. When you put a economic boycott that keeps food from people's mouth, that's a war. And we're in it right now.
Are we continuing to try to be the world's policeman? Is that part of it?
No, I don't sense that that's the National Security Council's goal. I think they're more in line with what's been said here. They're trying to take advantage of an open door. We've been blocked out of the Middle East for a long time in a meaningful way. I think we're acting like a superpower. We're grabbing an opportunity.
Frankly, I think one thing which was mentioned before, you started to characterize the world, which is so different from our world in terms of values, in terms of background history. I mean, there are 6,000 years of history when we take a look at Mesopotamia versus
Egypt,
and different values, and there's the advent of Muhammad that we have in Islamic world, which and we can probably compare this almost to what happened in the 30-year war, which ended in 1648 in Central Europe. You know, there are different factions, three very strong factions, and having lived there, you have probably for so much longer than I have, you have a better feeling for the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. Very, well, we could compare this to Christian faith, very basic, and then we have the Sunnis, and we have the Shiites, and these three groups, of course, coincide and partially overlap in terms of regional representation. And I think we certainly can see some of the problems occurring and reoccurring there because of this, and secondly, some of the problems, including we being the policemen, are probably due to the fact that we simply don't understand their way of life, their understanding, and so forth.
Okay, Uwe, my question for both you and TJ, since you have traveled extensively, since you've lived in Saudi Arabia, what would you tell Hoosiers that they should know in terms of the essential modus operandi about Arabs and or Saudi Arabians and or Iraqis?
Oh.
You go first.
No, thanks. You are them. No.
But I think that's a key question.
I hope.
It's very difficult, really, to... I mean, I lived in there off and on for about 13 years, and I didn't represent any particular quote large group company, so I had to work on my own, and I had to know the beggar in the street and member of the royal family or any small merchant or any big construction businessman there. And I tried for the life of me to understand. I prayed with them, I ate with them, I sat with them, and it's just that you're either going to accept them the way they are and let them be. You can't change them. You can't change them. You can't do it. So they are human beings. I mean, why should we go to Saudi? Or how about the Mohawk Indians in my hometown in Canada? I mean, this is in Canada, you know. I mean, this is their land. They have to live that way. It's their faith. It's their religion. And as long as they have use of you, you are their friend. If they don't, then you won't be their friends. As simple as that. So if there is a mutual interest, then we all should benefit from it and live happily thereafter, if there is any fairy tale story. But 1,500 years they have been fighting among themselves, and they're going to keep on fighting among themselves.
They had some empires there, you know, on their way to Vienna and Paris and so forth. I think, well, let's put it, you ask us, how does it compare with Indiana? I think there are a lot of parallels. One is, they certainly like law and order. They have very strong religious beliefs, which essentially are certainly in excess of what we know in what we might call our Bible Belt in this country and so forth. The Quran is law, the Sharia. Crime rate, they believe in it, and it works. The crime rate is probably the lowest in the world. If you go over the souk, you have all the gold over there. If you go to and change your money, people run around with large amounts of money in a plastic bag, you know, and you get to talk to them, and they say, oh, well, let me see, I have some gold coins from here, the eagle, or this, or this, and law and order, and particularly very strong beliefs in the family and the tribe are very strong. Their social security system is, well, that is another, but family, tribe, law and order, religion. It's different from ours, completely different from ours. But I think it's as sincere as what I would call the true Hoosier might be. They like their independence. And that comes from the Bedu tradition. There are different traditions, of course. It's highly complex. But I'm talking now particularly about the Saudis, and I think I see a lot of parallels in a very positive sense.
True.
Well, how complex is it, really? They have gone to war because they were short of U.S. dollars. That has nothing to do with cultural differences.
You're talking about the Iraq now.
Iraq. What we're hearing is sort of the Casey Kasem school of foreign policy. If we all sat down and understood each other better, everything would be okay. Well, in this case, you're just talking about raw economic incentives and disincentives. All that you've said being very true.
Yeah, but if nobody buys his oil and gives him any price, then he's going to still starve to death.
Well, that's short-term and long-term. I can grant some of the arguments you made earlier that short-term he's still got to sell his oil, but long-term you've got a much different picture if he controls it's clear he wants to control in the Middle East, and if he changes the picture of the Middle East like he would like to control it. There's a great line, a Marlon Brando line in a movie, I think it was The Last Oil Crisis, and where his aide comes up to him and says, gosh, we could raise the price of oil 10 cents and blame it on the Arabs. And he says, you fool, we are the Arabs. And I think the cultural differences you're making are very valid and true. But again, I just want to stress that this is really a war, very serious. It's a war in a very real degree, not just an academic degree. And when war breaks out, it erases a lot of these things that you and I know uphold a culture and keep it going, and these traditions and things that are so important. And that's one of the great tragedies of war, that all these things are wiped out and made irrelevant and turned on their head.
Yeah, should we be analyzing the culture of the people in the Middle East, or should we be analyzing the personality? Saddam Hussein, who seems to be the individual at the head of this.
See, I think what's happened is that the global change in the last couple of years has completely escaped this region. There is no perestroika, there is no glasnost. Iraq is the country that can fight a war. They have population, they have agriculture, they have weapons in the sense of one of the reasons they did so well against Iran. They have very simplistic Soviet weapons, and if anybody can fight a war, they can. But keep in mind in terms of answering your question, Larry, Saddam Hussein is the product of a dictatorship. He has nothing to do with religious values, and he has nothing to do with Islam. He's simply a power man. And in the Middle East, power advantage, it rules. Ruthlessness is something that is accepted because that's the way you keep your position. Has nothing to do with democracy.
It's also the way you keep the crime rate low, isn't it?
I think you could have said a lot of nice things about the German
up
culture in 1935, but the point was, and I think the rise of this man proves the thesis that the Middle East is ripe for nation building. This is the type of person that rises up.
It has been. You're right.
Yeah.
Every
We've kept it
200
down.
years, the Muslims have got their Mahdis to come up.
That's
that
right.
he's going to unite them. You know, I mean, this is going to happen.
Well, not
whether we are
sooner or
around
later,
not.
but maybe after we've converted to nuclear power, you know, hopefully.
But the cause of it, Greg, is that when it was Great Britain, they made Kuwait as a nation with 25,000 people. They made Bahrain a nation
Didn't they
with
just stand up and
5,000
draw
people.
lines
They made
on a blackboard?
Dubai a nation with 2,000 people. They made Abu Dhabi a nation with 500 people. They made Qatar a nation with 200 people.
Great Britain knew how to do this. They knew how to keep this from happening.
It wasn't there from I don't know, a divide and conquer, divide and rule.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
So let's okay.
But that's a valid foreign policy goal. We're not the
Nasser tried
custodians.
to unite them, and where was he?
The Central Americans have national aspirations. Everybody wants things a little bit differently. But you have to start making choices. Are we going to help these people make things differently, or we're going to thwart them? And there's no.
Why not
do both.
give them an option? Why not give them at least the opportunity of, fine, you want to solve it, you've got 3 weeks. If you don't solve it, we're going to step in.
Don't you think that was
within 3
given?
weeks, if they wanted to take Saudi Arabia, they could have taken it.
Don't you think that
Why
option
did they
was-
let that 11-year-old girl American leave Baghdad? You know how many foreigners are there in Kuwait and Iraq?
Well, I
How
don't know.
many foreigners?
What's the premise? The premise is that we could
If
have
he's
avoided
a
this.
maniac, as everybody is calling him, and a dictator, fine, I've got over 500,000 foreigners, 1 million Egyptians. Okay.
I think the
You know,
individual personality is incidental. This type of man
There,
will
this is
rise
what
from
I
this
wanted
culture.
to say. It's the
From the
Ba'ath Party, it's
historic-
not Saddam Hussein.
That's right.
Take Saddam Hussein, what is left? Somebody else is going to come up.
I think
right,
that's the
exactly.
key issue which you just raised. And as a matter of fact, you started to make a comparison I've seen in the media, heard in the media, which is Hitler.
I think
That's
And
ridiculous.
there are, well, it's always difficult to compare because conditions are different. Indeed, there are certain parallels between Hitler marching into Poland and Iraq invading and
Come on,
annexing.
you can't be serious. No, really, you can't.
Well, I was careful formulating it. I think there
I
are
don't know.
problems
I
with
think that's a pretty good
comparison,
analogy.
But
And
the
the
fact
butcher
is
of Baghdad, he's the head of state, okay? He's the head of a state, and there that runs Iraq is the Ba'ath Party. And the Ba'ath Party's
understand.
worst enemy is Syria, which is half of al-Assad.
And
When
also
they split.
ruled
Well-
by the Ba'ath Party, but a different set of Ba'aths.
right.
But
let
there
me
is
just-
another one behind him. He has converted that nation over 15 years. Everybody, if not a Ba'ath Party, he is not an Iraqi.
Well, go ahead, Greg.
Frankly,
the
let me just briefly finish my sentence about this comparison. The point is, there were small acts of annexations, aggressions when we look at history, and let's learn from history. And I think this is a very important argument. If somebody swallows up countries surrounding him, I think one wants to be very careful. Iraq did invade Iran
Which is wrong.
when they thought they were weak. They thought the opportunity was just right to swallow up Kuwait. We just talked about the vulnerability of Saudi Arabia. You just mentioned the arch enemies, Syria and Iran.
Hey, but
Iraq.
What's the difference between the Americans going into Grenada or Panama or the Israelis going into the West Bank? We all went there because of national self-interest.
Exactly. You know, there's
Syria and Lebanon.
Right. The Brits tell us, the Brits don't think that Americans can think strategically. And there's a real strong case to be made. And if we learn from history, every time that we have been successful in foreign policy or foreign policy by other means, the Great Britain has told us where to be and when to be there. And we supplied the proper number of tanks and people. Now, what these gentlemen are asking us to do is to start thinking strategically.
Long term.
Long term in our interests and other people's interests.
Why the farmers in Indiana suffer because of the boycott of growing whatever what they're going to lose close to 100 million. What for?
If the first fatality, a truck accident, hits the front page, you can imagine what's going to happen.
The laughter.
Yeah,
they're going to come and
down the road.
save us. You know.
Yeah. I think the thing for Hoosiers to learn is that Americans are going to be in the Middle East for a long, long time. Not just 60 days, and hopefully we're going to be there along under the UN flag and not under our flag. If we're there under our flag, we're in deep, deep trouble. If we can get the French and the rest of the world to be there with us, we're in less trouble.
But John, just like in Lebanon when we were there among the Italians, the French, when tried to who got hurt? See, the Americans will always get the revenge of those Mongolians, whatever they are being called. I'm sorry, I'm not Mongolian.
Isn't there yet another opportunity here, though? The UN, for all its silliness, they gave a commendation to Libya the other day, but is still designed for superpowers to get together and say and do a lot of the things I think everybody at this table wants to happen.
Yep.
We don't want this area crushed for an economic 5 cents a gallon.
Right.
And one of the more promising ways to avoid that is what you're seeing. That vote in the UN was historic, given the recent history of the UN.
And if you get China, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, France, and the United States together on international policy, that is something that hasn't occurred very much in the last 45 years.
Putting it again here in the context of
Indiana.
We
will put it in no context. We're out of time. Thanks anyway. Craig Ledwig, Uwe Kuller, T.J. Youssef, John Rouse for being with us here today on this Hoosier Perspective on the Middle East. I'm Larry Lough. See you next week.
Public Affairs Roundtable is produced in the studios of WIPB Channel 49 on the campus of Ball State University. The producer is John Rouse. Listener comments are welcome.